Same day, same sweatshirt, but I'm going to be reading chapter 3 of The Social Art. And this chapter is called The Act of Communicating. And it begins with a quote from Ferdinand de Saussure. Language, then, has the strange, striking characteristic of not having entities that are perceptible at the outset, and yet of not permitting us to doubt that they exist and that their functioning continues it. The first thing the child has to discover is that it is possible to communicate with other beings. Children usually find this out fairly quickly when their cries produce some kind of response. Mothers and other caregivers also often set up small communicative routines, such as peekaboo, in which the child learns to respond to certain cues. Children also soon learn to recognize not only faces but also facial expressions and to associate these expressions with different moods. It has also been suggested that the early routine of feeding sets a pattern of turn taking long before the infant is capable of any kind of conversational exchange. Mothers are often anxious to encourage any response from the infant that can be interpreted as intentional communication. The following is an exchange between a mother and a 3-month-old girl. Mother: "Oh, what a nice little smile." Daughter smiles. "Yes, isn't that nice? There's a nice little smile." Daughter burps. "What a nice wind as well. Yes, that's better, isn't it? Yes, yes." Daughter vocalizes. "Yes, there's a nice noise." At this age, the child is more capable of understanding the language that the dog is of grasping its name, but that does not prevent adults from talking to very young children as if they could understand. At any kind of sound or facial expression, sneeze, cough, burp, or yawn, may be responded to as if the child had made a conversational remark. The mother, of course, knows that these noises are not part of language. This is something this child has to find out. As adults, we know that communication can be through any of the senses. The most direct is touch. A punch on the nose, a hug, or a kiss conveys the message very directly. The extent to which Western societies believe that smell communicates can be seen in the perfume and deodorant business. Even taste can be used. We sugar the pill to make it palatable. The two most important senses for human communication, however, are sight and hearing. We communicate visually in many ways, from the decoration of our rooms to the car we ride, from the length of our hair to the clothes we wear. The role of uniforms in signaling authority is obvious. Posture and gait also can send messages. Again, the military provides example. By smiling, frowning, or looking puzzled, we can send important messages, but the most flexible visual signaling system, leaving aside writing, which is a special case and will be dealt with in Chapter 15, is through gestures. By pointing, beckoning, nodding, shaking a fist, waving, and so on, we can express a large number of very specific messages. Most of these signals are conventional and may vary from society to society, but there are also involuntary gestures such as scratching one's nose, rubbing one's eye, changing posture, or crossing one's legs that may give indications of our impatience. Not to be confused with these visual forms of communication are the varieties of sign language, such as American Sign Language, used by the hearing impaired. Sign language systems are as complex and structured as spoken languages, and is capable of dealing with the total range of communicative functions. At many scholarly conferences, sign language interpreters can be seen translating highly abstruse and dense spoken reports into sign. There used to be great prejudice against signing by those responsible for the education of hearing impaired children because it was thought that they would make little effort to understand or use spoken language. However, recent scholarship has emphasized the crucial role of language acquisition for cognitive and emotional development, regardless of the channel used. As a result, hearing impaired children are now encouraged to master any form of language in which they can find out and communicate about the world around them. The primary channel for most human communication, however, is acoustic. In evolutionary terms, it is easy to see why this should be the case. Auditory communication in the dark and other situations in which the participants cannot see each other. Obviously, not all the sounds that we produce are part of language. In addition to the various sounds that our bodies produce involuntarily, we can clap our hands, stamp our feet, and whistle. The sounds that come out of the mouth, however, are most important, and here the child has to learn to distinguish between those sounds which are part of language and those which are not. Coughs, sneezes, belches, and yawns have to be ignored. The child also has to learn that there are differences in the noises that do not directly affect the meaning of what is said. In this respect, it does not matter how loudly or softly, how quickly or slowly, how hesitantly or fluently the noises are made, although such aspects are an important part of total communication. Linguists call these aspects paralinguistic features, and while there are many ways in which their occurrence is more predictable than one might expect, they are not parts of the linguistic signal. The most important point is that the child has to discover the phonetic character of language. The discovery that a limited number of noises can be used to convey particular meanings is the essential first step in understanding the nature of language, since language is a mode of expressing meanings through sound. The child has to discover that communicative noises may differ from each other, only partially. For example, pin, bin, tin, din, sin, thin, fin, gin, chin, kin, win. In these words, there are two sounds, I and N, and the that are the same, but the sound that precedes them in each case is different. That's my cat. A list of phonetic symbols is given on page 225 to 226. Each of these words has a distinct meaning, and their individuality is signaled by the different initial sounds. Note that some sounds, TH and CH, are represented by two letters, but the writing system is misleading in this respect. The relationship between writing and speaking will be examined in Chapter 15. Sounds that are capable of indicating a difference of meanings are called phonemes. The child must discover which sounds are phonemes in the language because each language has a different set of phonemes. Phonemes. I think that phonemes. Languages may differ in the kinds of sounds they use, but also in the ways in which the sounds are used. For example, French and Portuguese have nasal vowels that are produced by allowing the sound to escape through the nose as well as through the mouth. These vowels are phonemes in French and Portuguese. In English, vowels may be nasalized before or after a nasal consonant, such as M or N, but these nasalized vowels are not phonemes in English. They are merely variants of the oral vowel, that is, the vowels produced by allowing the sound to escape only through the mouth. Variants of phonemes are called allophones, and many phonemes have two or more allophones. For example, the phoneme T in English has several allophones. It has become conventional to write phonemes between slant lines, T and allophones between square brackets. In a word such as ton, the T is pronounced with a slight puff of air after it like a very lightly pronounced H. This puff of air is called aspiration. The T in the word stun, however, does not have the following puff of air. That is, it is not aspirated. It is a general rule of English that the sounds P, T, and K are aspirated at the beginning of words, but not aspirated after the sound S. This is something that most speakers of English do not notice because it is not a phonemic difference, but speakers of other languages are more likely to notice it. In particular, speakers of languages such as Thai and Korean, where the difference between aspirated and unaspirated consonants is phonemic, will notice it at once. There is another allophone of T that has become increasingly common in the speech of many inhabitants of British cities, and that is the glottal stop, which is produced by a closure of the vocal cords rather than in the mouth. It is often heard in American speech in the word mountain, and sometimes in bottle. This is an allophone of T in English, but in languages such as Arabic and Tagalog, glottal stops are phonemic. Learning the phonemic distinctions of the other languages is one of the most important tasks in trying to master a foreign language. Until we have succeeded in that, there is a great risk that we shall not be able to make ourselves understood. However, until we have mastered, if we ever do, the allophonic variances, we shall have a foreign accent. The infant's first vocal noises are forms of crying and a variety of noises such as spluttering and burping. At about 6 to 8 weeks, the infant usually has a small repertoire of calls that are often described as cooing, perhaps because of the frequency of ooh sounds in these vocalizations. These cooing sounds are apparently signs that the infant is comfortable, and it is likely that the infant is, to some extent, using them deliberately. Gradually, the young child begins to use a fairly wide variety of vocal noises, many of which sound very similar to syllables in adult speech, and often sequences of these noises have an intonation pattern that makes them sound like utterances in the adult language. This state is called babbling and precedes the point at which the child can be said to be using language. Many of the combinations of sounds produced in babbling are similar to those the child uses early in linguistic development, particularly in the frequency of single consonant vowel CV syllables. It is possible that this babbling serves an important purpose in allowing children to practice using their speech organs in a way that will later be useful to them, although the role of babbling in language development is far from clear. In babbling, it is not known whether the child is actually attempting to produce a particular sequence of sounds or cares how closely one syllable resembles or differs from one another. In speech, even at the earliest stage, the child is apparently aiming at consistency in the use of a word, even though there will be much variation in the actual phonetic forms produced by the child for that word. The differences between babbling and speech are largely a matter of control. A simple comparison may help to illustrate the difference. Even if you have never had a piano lesson in your life, you can sit down at a piano and produce sequences of notes simply by letting your fingers run over the keys. In this way, you may produce short sequences that sound tuneful, though you may not be able to reproduce those sequences at will. However, when you take lessons and start to control your fingers as to produce a certain sequence, you will probably need to limit yourself at first to a small number of sequences to get them right. You will no longer be producing the wide variety of tunes that you did when you were just running your fingers over the keyboard, but you have taken the first step that may ultimately result in your becoming an accomplished pianist. This roughly parallels what the child does in learning to speak, with the significant difference that not all of those who take piano lessons end up as pianists, whereas all normal children learn to speak. The order in which the child learns to produce sounds is predictable up to a point. It is probably not an accident that many of the words for mother, father, and other close relatives are similar in a wide variety of languages. In English, I'm just telling y'all this bottom table. English, mama, mommy, papa, daddy. Russian, mama, papa. Romanian, mama, tata. Welsh, mom, tad. Bulgarian, baba for grandmother. Turkish, baba for father. Pima and Laguna, which is American Indian languages. Ma, mas. Nana, grandmother, papa, grandfather. The simplest sounds for the child to produce are apparently those produced with the lips, P, B, and M, and these produced by putting the tip of the tongue against or slightly behind the back of the upper teeth, T, D, and N. The first syllables usually consist of one consonant followed by one vowel. It also seems to be the case that the earliest way for the child to make a short word longer is by repeating the same syllable. Thus, words such as mama, papa, dada, and tata are relatively easy for children to produce, and it is not surprising that words of this kind should form part of the child's early vocabulary. It also not surprising that sounds and combinations of sounds that are easy for children to produce should also be found widely in the languages of the world. All languages have syllables consisting of a consonant followed by a vowel, CV, but some languages, such as Samoan, have only CV syllables. English, on the other hand, has syllables with up to 3 consonants before the vowel. Spring, and up to 4 after it, sixths. It is not the case, however, that any 3 consonants can occur at the beginning of an English syllable. As in so many other respects, there are rules, and there are called phonematic rules. I cannot say that word. If a word in English begins with 3 consonants, the first consonant must be S and the second P, T, or K. Note that we are referring to sounds, not letters, so K may be spelled with a C. The third consonant will also be one of a small set of rule is slightly more complicated. Thus, we have words such as split, strike, scream, but not split, strike, scream, spelled with a Z, and then other letters. There are also rules for combinations of 2 consonants in English. Combinations of 2 or 3 consonants are not possible in many languages, whereas other languages have combinations of consonants that are not possible in English. The examples of the list marked with an asterisk, used to indicate a form that is not found in the language, are quite easy to pronounce, so what combinations occur in a language is not simply a matter of pronounceability. Some consonants are, however, inherently easier than others to pronounce. A simple experiment will demonstrate this. If I ask you to bring thumb and index finger together while they are touching lightly, you will find this is a difficult task. But if I ask you to bring them together until they are about the thickness of a piece of paper apart, you will find this much more difficult. The reason is that the peripheral muscles in this case simply have to send back a message to the brain saying that contact has been made. In the second case, the messages are more complex and contradictory. Closer, not so close, closer again. In fact, in trying to keep your finger and thumb separate are at about the thickness of a paper, you will probably bring them in contact from time to time and then overcorrect by opening much wider than you thought. Yeah. Certain consonants, for example, P, B, T, D, K, and G, are produced by making a firm closure of the mouth that interrupts the airstream coming from the lungs. They are known as stop consonants. Oh my gosh. This closure is caused by bringing the lips together for P and B and making firm contact between part of the tongue and the roof of the mouth for the others. Children generally find sounds such as these relatively easy to produce, and they are found in most of the world's languages. Other consonants are produced by bringing, for example, the tip of the tongue close to but not actually touching the roof of the mouth to produce the S and Z sounds. Sounds of this kind are called fricatives, and they require more complex muscular control. Children usually do not begin to use them until they have succeeded with some of the stop consonants. The most difficult consonants include L, R, and CH, the first sound in chin. G, the first sound in gym. And sh, the first sound in ship. Z, the middle consonant in measure. And th, the first sound in thumb. And the first sound in them. The. Sorry. Though not necessarily in that order. It is not surprising that young children often at first avoid words that contain more difficult sounds, even though the objects they refer to must be quite familiar to the children. For example, finger and thumb, juice and cheese. It is also not surprising that some of the sounds that English-speaking children find difficult do not occur in all the languages of the world. For example, children learn the L and R sounds relatively late, and these sounds are not found in all languages. Japanese, for example, has only R and Cantonese only L. Even in English, there are important dialect differences in the use of these two sounds. If you put your hands over your ears and pronounce the sounds S and Z in succession, you will notice an obvious difference. In the production of Z sounds, you will hear a buzzing in your ears that does not occur during the production of S sounds. This buzzing is actually produced by the throat by the vibration of the vocal cords, which are the lips at the top of the windpipe that, among other things, prevent food from getting into the lungs. Just as when you close your lips firmly, air cannot enter or leave your mouth, so when the vocal cords are tightly closed, nothing can enter or leave the lungs. However, if you close your lips lightly and blow, you will produce a noise that is often considered rude. What? If you close your lips lightly and blow. In a similar fashion, when the vocal cords are loosely closed and we force air out of the lungs, we produce a buzzing sound that distinguishes Z and S. This buzzing sound is known as voicing, and speech sounds are mostly classified as either voiced, with the vocal cords vibrating, or voiceless, with the vocal cords apart, allowing the air to pass freely. The difference between voiced and voiceless sounds is fundamental to human language, and all languages use both kinds of sounds, although the kinds of sounds and the ways in which they are used vary from language to language. Vowels are generally voiced, but consonants can be either. And in the early stages, children learning English do not make a systematic distinction between voiced consonants, B, D, G, V, Z, and their voiceless counterparts, P, T, K, F, S. For example, they will use either P or B apparently indifferently. This is because they have not yet learned to make the phonemic distinction between P and B. Gradually, they learn to make this distinction, at first at the beginning of words, then in the middle of words, and finally at the end of words. Similarly, adults learning a second language will have difficulty in making a distinction between a pair of voiced and voiceless consonants if their own language does not have this distinction. Children often substitute sounds that they find easier to produce for those they find more difficult. For example, one 2-year-old girl said nam for thumb and bap for lamp. Lamb? These examples also show how it is not only individual sounds that children find difficult, but also combinations of sounds. Both N and M are nasal consonants produced by the air passing through the nose. Both B and P are oral consonants produced by the air passing out through the mouth. At the same stage, she also said Upud for apron. This is not because she could not pronounce N, but because at that time she had difficulty in pronouncing a word with both a nasal and an oral consonant. In omitting certain sounds or in replacing one sound by another, children are not behaving perversely or being careless about the sounds they use. They are in the process of mastering a highly complex set of intricate muscular movements, and it takes time to learn to coordinate the movements correctly. As adults, we have been doing this so long and so well that we do not realize what an achievement it is. It is only when we try to learn new sounds or new combinations of sounds in another language that we find out how complex the whole business is. Or when you have to read aloud a word that normally you just read in your mind and you never have to say it out loud. Anyways, that's me right now. Children, however, may be aware of distinctions in the sounds adults make, even when they cannot make them themselves. One boy who regularly said mouse for mouth would not accept that pronunciation from his father, and there were many examples showing that he could distinguish pairs of words in adult speech that sounded the same when he said them. This ability to discriminate sounds helps to explain why, when children learn how to make a new distinction in their speech, they usually do not extend it in the wrong places. Thus, when this boy finally succeeded in saying mouth instead of mouse, he did not at the same time begin to say houth instead of house. The process of mastering the system of speech sounds in a language takes time and may not be fully achieved until the age of 7 or 8, but the basic system is usually well established by about 4. Until it is fully established, strangers may have difficulty in understanding what the child says, and part of the motivation for the child to speak more clearly may be increased contact with adults and other children outside of the immediate family. The rate at which this happens depends more upon the child than on any efforts of adults to insist on the correct pronunciation. As with many other aspects of language development, children have to find their own way, and the amazing thing is that they do it very well. Yeah, the end for chapter 3.